Hi, I'm Jason. Welcome to Your Language Life. So I'd like today to introduce you to the book that I used when I decided to take on learning Chinese characters, that is Mandarin characters. So it's called Learning Chinese Characters, funny enough. And the publisher is Tuttle. The authors are Matthews and Matthews. And this is an older version of the book. The cover doesn't look like this anymore from what I can tell online. It's also for an older version of the standardized test called the HSK for those of us who are learning Chinese not as our native language. So don't look for this cover, but look for this title and the authors. Now, learning Chinese characters, this book is great for the reason that for me, it worked great because it provides a lot of mnemonics. But not only that, it provides a system from which they make their own mnemonics, but you can use that system to make your own mnemonics, which is even better because we always remember mnemonics better when they're the ones we create ourselves based on our own life experience, our most potent memories and emotions and feelings. So I want just to give you a quick tour. So you definitely want to start with the user guide, as it says, essential reading before starting chapter 1. And it gives you the tools. It gives you the nuts and bolts of how the system works. Right? And I'll just discuss it very briefly here in this video. And then in future videos, I'll give you advice about how to go about using the system to make your own mnemonics, how to tweak and embellish their mnemonics in a way that will make them even more memorable. But first you have to understand how the system works. So, of course, not all characters are composed of components. Some of them are the fundamental components, and that's, of course, where you start when you're first learning. And those characters are going to be, that can also be remembered with stories. But, of course, if you don't have like building blocks of meaning to incorporate into the stories, what exactly are you going to build in? And so they take the path of stories that involve wheels. So there's a wheel involved. If there's a wheel involved in the story, that means it's a story for one of these very basic characters. If it's a story for one of the basic characters, you can be sure that there's a wheel involved. And there aren't very many of them, and so that works pretty well. You only have to remember so many wheel stories, and there just aren't that many of them. So once you've done that, and you have a handle on the basics, then you start getting your first compound characters. And the one that, there's a couple that they use as demonstrations. One being cup, bei, and the other being machine, ji. And now you get to meet some of the characters who are involved. So if you just heard my pronunciation, I was using the high tone, bei, ji. So high tone corresponds to a particular archetype, what they call archetype, fancy word for character, right? So if you look here, it says, right, the archetypes represent tones, right? So the giant is the first tone, high, also known as high tone, which makes sense, right? Giants are really tall. They're high up in the air. So cool. A fairy is the rising tone, right? Fairies can fly, so they can fly up. And it's easy to remember. The teddy, like the teddy bear, they're thinking of this like sort of reckless, playful, little teddy bear type guy who's always bouncing around and full of energy, just like the third tone, which goes down and then up, like bouncing, right? Down and then up. So, but it's also called the low tone. So, because really when it's actually pronounced, you don't have a whole lot of dynamic tone movement. Most people, they just pronounce it low. So regardless, you can remember the teddy bear is the one that has the third tone, goes down and up. And then finally, the dwarf is the falling tone because he's always grouchy and yelling at people and demanding things. So falling tone, and so these four characters, these four archetypes, form the building blocks. There are more building blocks that you can use to make your stories. And then you realize, oh, if that character's in the story, then the corresponding character pronunciation must have the corresponding tone for that character. So that's the next thing. And then they also will include in their stories a sound word, an English sound word, whose first syllable reminds you of the pronunciation of the corresponding character in Chinese. So for example, if the character, sorry, the syllable, the character was pronounced P or P or P or whatever, regardless of the tone, the sound word that they would use in the story would be pizza, right? If it was Thai, then they would use a tiger. And like the example for bay for cup, bacon. So let's look at the story that they give for bacon, just to give you an idea, because it's so memorable. I love it. Right, so this story says cup, bay. Right, you see the picture. Not every story has a picture. A lot of them, when it's helpful, they put one. So you can see there's a lumberjack, and he's going to cut down a tree, and someone comes along and says, "Not the tree with the cup tied to it," the other lumberjack apprentice says. All right, so that's the first half. That's the first half, which helps you remember that the character is composed of not and cup. Right, not and tree. Tree, not. Not the tree with the cup. Right, there are those three key words in the first half. Not, tree, cup. And if you put not and tree together, you get cup. Of course, you have to remember the order. It's actually, you write the tree first, that's the radical. And then not is the right-hand side. And that gives you the meaning, cup. But how do you pronounce it? That's what the second half of the story in italics is for. The giant collects the sap from that one to cook his bacon in. So I'm sure you can smell in your mind's nose the bacon cooking, the giant's bacon. Maybe the bacon is giant because the giant is huge. He needs a lot of bacon. So there's this giant bacon cooking in a giant frying pan full of not grease or whatever, but maple syrup or some kind of sap. So what would that smell like? What would it smell like to fry bacon in maple syrup? Oh, I can't. It sounds delicious, right? And I'm like already salivating. So this is a really good mnemonic to remember this character. Right now I've got bacon, bacon. I know the tone because it's the giant, so it's bay, not bay, not bay, not bay, but bay, and I can remember that it's not the tree with the cup on it, not the tree with the cup on it. That tree was marked by the giant. So it all ties together. It all ties together, and it lets me remember any part of the story that I've forgotten, as long as I remember the other parts of the story. That's the goal. So there are other complicated aspects to this. They have extra mechanisms for when a character has more than one pronunciation. It's hard to come up with English sound word clues for every single possible pronunciation in Chinese, every single what's called a final. But they have systems for dealing with that as well, like when it has a oo on glide before the vowel or a e on glide before the vowel. They modify the archetype slightly. Anyway, I could go on and on about this system. I won't take up any more of your time. This was just an introduction to say I recommend this book, I recommend this method, but please do check out my future videos about how to make the most out of it, because, yeah, it's your language life. See you next time.